Welcome to Logos Live. I'm Robert Martin, the Director of the City Bible Forum in Melbourne, and I'm your host for the show. Logos is Greek for word or message. And Logos Live seeks to engage the Christian message before a live audience in the CBD of Melbourne. And we have a live audience here today. Are they alive? Do we have a live audience?
Yes.
There's a couple of hand waves there as well, which is a little bit difficult to pick up on the recording. And we also aim to have a little bit of fun. Who said exploring the big questions of life shouldn't be enjoyable? Now, modern Australian culture is influenced, for better or worse, by Christianity. In fact, the Christian message dominates the history of Western civilization. And the birth of Christianity can be traced to that events of that first Easter week. Why is Easter so important? How could these events change the world? Well, over a number of sessions, we'll be engaging the Easter story firsthand. And today we're looking at the start of that week that changed the world, what is commonly known as Palm Sunday, Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. And we're privileged to have our local church pastor, James Hornby of St Jude's in Parkville, join us to chat more about this. Now, we're going to meet James in just a moment, but before I'd like to introduce our performance poet, please welcome Cam Simmons.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to read the bit of the Bible that we're thinking about today. Luke chapter 19, verses 28 to 44. As Jesus approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' say, 'The Lord needs it.'" Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" They replied, "The Lord needs it." They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you."
I'd like to introduce our guest today, the Reverend James Hornby. James is the minister of St Jude's Anglican Church in Parkville, a church in the inner north of Melbourne geared towards families and young urban professionals. James worked for the Department of Sustainability and Environment and then Vic Forests. He's also worked in South Africa with AIDS orphans. He's married with young kids and therefore looks constantly tired. Hopefully he's awake now. Please welcome James Hornby.
Thank you.
Delighted that you can join us here today. Welcome.
Thanks, Rob.
Here to talk about Easter, the week that changed the world. So why is it worthwhile, do you think, engaging with the Easter story?
Well, because if it is the week that changed the world, you want to be on it. You want to know about it. I think for Christians, the week leading up to Easter is the central week of and holds the central truths of what we believe. So if we are if we took that week out as Christians, we'd really have nothing. And yet Christians believe that this week and the man that features in this week, Jesus, his actions, his words, the person of who he is and who he was, really does change us and can indeed change the world, has changed the world, but continues to change. So I think I think it's really important if you're interested in faith and exploring truths to at least explore faithfully this week.
Sure. So why is Easter important to you?
It's really important to me because of the central message of Easter, that Jesus Christ, this man who claimed to be the Son of God, who I believe is the Son of God, died. And didn't just die, but accomplished something in his death and was resurrected. And because of that, I can be reconciled to God, that I can have a relationship with God. That's why I think it's really important to me.
We are going to spend the next few weeks looking at various aspects of the Easter story, the week that changed the world. And today we begin what's known as the Passion narrative, the final week of Jesus' life. Now, the Gospel of Luke's been narrating Jesus' journey towards Jerusalem for about 10 chapters or so, since chapter 9, verse 51. Now, in the passage that Cam has just read for us, and we'll be looking at today, he approaches Jerusalem. So, James, why is Jerusalem so important?
Sure. It's interesting to note too that when Jesus gets to Jerusalem, he's at the top of the hill, he's about to descend in. There's no flag waving that says the week that changed the world. You know, when you start off in a run, if you've ever done a fun run, you get to run through the little entry, and then there's the finish line. There's nothing that really signifies, in one sense, that this is the beginning of something that will transform human history. But for Jesus, Jerusalem is really important. Firstly, it's the holy city. So as a Jew, every year, this week is set in about early April, the month of Nisan in the Jewish calendar. It's early spring, so the days are getting warmer as opposed to here. And it's the one time of the year where Jews gather for the Passover. And the Passover is sort of the central Jewish festival. It's where they celebrate their national identity that's formed because they were rescued from slavery. So this is a really key moment in your Jewish calendar. So you make your pilgrimage to Jerusalem. That's where you celebrate Passover. And it's interesting to note too that, when you think of Jerusalem, you think it's a city, right? I don't know about you, but I think of a city that, like Melbourne, might be, 3-4 million people, crowds. Jerusalem in Jesus' day, on the average week, is about 10 to 15,000 people. Okay, so it's actually a really small city by modern standards.
Just like going to Wodonga.
Not even going to
Not
Wodonga.
even going to Wodonga. Imagine, yeah.
It's like going to Shepparton.
Right.
But for these 2 weeks of the year, Shepparton or Jerusalem is no longer 10 to 15,000 people. It's around about 125,000 people. So you try and cram 125,000 people into a city or a town that's built and has infrastructure for 10 to 15,000 people. You get a sense of just how clogged up it is. Even as Jesus is entering Jerusalem, there's traffic jams like you wouldn't believe. But Jerusalem's also
horse jams or something.
Jams, possibly donkey jams.
Donkey jams. I'm not quite sure what a donkey jam would be like. Yeah.
I'm not sure about that either. But Jerusalem's also really important because the Old Testament and the scriptures that the Jews had prophesied or spoke that the Messiah would come to Jerusalem. So every Jew has this great hope that one day the Messiah, and Messiah means anointed one day the anointed one will come to the Mount of Olives, will come to Jerusalem, this holy city. So if you take a step back, it's actually really important that Jesus is coming to Jerusalem because he's about to declare himself as the anointed one. And for him to be the anointed one, he needs to be coming into Jerusalem.
It's one of those things, there's no flag at this stage. We're sort of saying, this is really important, you really need to listen to this. It's just it's just sort of
It's just another day in the life of the average Jew, but behind the scenes, if you will, something extraordinarily significant is just taking place or about to take place.
So he's coming in, and so we see in this passage today, the story sort of narrates 3 components. Jesus kind of gets this colt. He rides the colt into Jerusalem, and then he laments those who rejects him. So let's look at the acquisition of the colt.
Sure.
What do you make of this?
Well, generally, the two ways of looking at it is that it's either a prophetic prediction that Jesus, an insight that Jesus has, that he has this, if you will, supernatural knowledge of where the cult is, or that it's made up, that, later on in the Gospels, the writer, in this case Luke, who's a doctor, he just scribbles in and Jesus went and predicted a cult because he wrote it in a cult. So it made sense. You need to probably have that in. I think the cult is really important. I don't know necessarily if I would say it's a supernatural foretelling or a miracle of Jesus. Some would say that it is central because Jesus is announcing himself as the Messiah. I agree that Jesus announces himself as the Messiah. But I think it's through the cult, not necessarily the prediction. So Jesus has performed many miracles. Like if you're going to be impressed by a miracle, what are you impressed by? Predicting a donkey in a shed or feeding 5,000 people out of 2 loaves and a fish. In terms of magnitude, Jesus has performed many miracles that have spoken along the way. I think, and it was quite common, it might be unusual to our ears, we can imagine doing this with our cars or our bicycles, but towns, villages, quite often had, if you will, beasts of burden that were available to anyone. So it's not beyond the bounds of probability. In fact, it's highly likely that Jesus actually just prearranged the cult. But that doesn't take away from what the cult represents. Throughout the Old Testament, there are predictions made about the Anointed One, about who this person will be. And one of those predictions comes from a book in the Bible called Zechariah, from Zechariah chapter 9. It predicts that the Messiah will come in riding a colt, riding a donkey. Mm-hmm. So if you're a writer and you're trying to show that this person is the Anointed One, is the Messiah, then you need to have him on a donkey. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't think it's fabricated. I think Jesus really came in on a donkey, and I don't think it's magic. This isn't a David Copperfield, episode. Now you see it, now you don't. But I do think donkeys are really important. In fact, I was thinking about on the way in, Rob, what would be your top 3 donkeys of all time? Like, if you just had to pick 3 donkeys to go, this is my big 3, what would you go with?
Well, are we talking sports teams?
No, I'm talking about literal donkeys.
I think that some of I don't know. I haven't really got many. I haven't thought much about the history of donkeys.
Is an important
maybe
question.
Does anyone in the crowd, does anyone in the audience have a history? Favourite donkeys of all time? Sorry?
Balaam's
donkey.
Wouldn't be in my top 3, but that's a contender.
So Balaam's donkey was one of the ones.
There we go. The donkey from Shrek.
Donkey from Shrek.
He's in my top 3.
He was a noble steed, as far as I'm aware.
We're on a first name basis with Donkey too. If you say Donkey, you know Shrek. So I think he's in my top 3. I'll give you my other. I think the cult here, he's in my top 3. The other one I went with was Eeyore. So if you're a Winnie the Pooh fan, I think Eeyore has to be in your top 3 donkeys of all time.
Oh dear.
But yeah, the donkey is very important because.
So why is the donkey important? Tell us.
Okay, because of the prophecies in the Old Testament that predict the Messiah will come in a donkey, Jesus coming in a donkey declares himself to be the Messiah. Now, a lot of people say, well, Jesus never really said, I'm the Son of God, or never really said, I'm... Well, if you read your Bibles, he actually did on several occasions. But this is another of those moments where Jesus' actions speak louder, if you will, than his words. Comes in on a donkey. A lot of people get a bit uptight because... there's 3 or 4 different guys that give an account of this setting. Some use the word donkey. We have our Bibles, they read he came in on a donkey. Some people say he came in on a colt. Oh no, an inconsistency. What is it? Well, it's really not that exciting. It's the Greek word, Rob, you gave us a Greek word before, that's used to describe it, logos. The Greek word is polon, which is a really great word, but it basically means a young animal, a young beast. And it could have been a young donkey or a young horse. Well, we go with donkey. It's what's described, but the word's interchangeable. There's no issue there. So Jesus comes in on this donkey. You can tell a lot about the person by the way they enter the city.
As we mentioned, Jerusalem's busy. Lots of people. Donkey jams.
Yeah.
If this was in the modern day setting, if Jesus was coming into the city in a car, what sort of car would he be driving?
Well, I mean, straight off the top of my head, surely he'd be driving a Mitsubishi Colt. But if it depends on how you think about it. So if you're thinking outside the box, maybe then Jesus, Toyota Prius, I think. Surely you're thinking about the environment. But we're in Jerusalem. So if I had to pick a winner, I mean, if you've ever travelled down the dusty, dirty roads of Palestine, I'd be going with a second-hand Land Rover. And
Or Hilux.
Or a Hilux, clear the road.
Unbreakable.
Unbreakable, get it in. But, I'll still go with my first answer, Mitsubishi Colt.
Well, there's significance there with the Colt, isn't there? Because this is an interesting juxtaposition of images. Like, here we are, this supposed king, this guy who's coming in, fulfilling the prophecies from the Old Testament, claiming to be this great king, and he's driving a Ferrari, a Bentley, a Porsche. No, it's a Mitsubishi Colt.
Bentley.
I don't know many sports stars or movie stars when they're looking at, they've made it to the top. They're looking at getting a new car. They don't tend to go for the Colt. Maybe it's just underrated. I'm not sure. So what's the significance of Jesus taking this sort of humble animal as his entry to the city?
Yeah, sure. You've actually got me thinking about kilowatts per kilo and things like that. I don't think Jay Leno, who's renowned for his car collection, I don't think he has a Mitsubishi Colt. When I think about the fact that you can tell a lot about a person when they enter a city, I think of Kaiser Wilhelm II, who was a German emperor, 1898, enters Jerusalem on a mighty white horse, and he's got a retinue that's so large they actually have to deconstruct part of the wall to fit everybody through. So they tear down the wall so we can get in. And I think that's a classic image of what you'd expect of a king entering a city, king entering Jerusalem, is a mighty war steed. Jesus picks a donkey, and I think there's two reasons for that. The first reason, which most people, especially if you're familiar with the story to some degree, would be aware of, is what a donkey represents in terms of humility. Okay, it's a beast of burden. The donkey has a lot of association with humility. It's the complete opposite, if you will. As you said, it's a juxtaposition with the mighty war horse. And I think that says something about Jesus and who he is. But what a lot of people also miss out on is the fact that the donkey also had royal connotations. So again, you go back to the Old Testament, and the donkey was an animal used or prophesied about in terms of royalty. So there's an association. You could ride a donkey and still be king. It wasn't done because you'd go for the white steed.
The noble steed.
The noble steed.
Yeah, that's right.
But so I think it's important to go, Jesus on a donkey is still saying, I'm a king. He's not saying I'm not a king because I'm not on a white steed. I'm on a donkey. Actually, according to the scriptures, that's entirely appropriate for me to be on a donkey because it's a royal animal. However, it also says something about the kind of person that Jesus is in terms of his humility and what he came to do.
Yeah, he's a different type of king.
Absolutely.
So we see there's a number of, as you've described, sort of messianic elements in this. There's the prediction of the future, which sort of Jesus is somehow able to predict this donkey or this colt. He's riding a colt, which fulfills the Old Testament. But there's also this cry of the disciples that they're shouting out to him. What do you make of that?
Yeah, sure. So many people know, and again, it depends on the version. I think in the version that Cam read for us, it said, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord." That phrase comes from Psalm 118, and it's actually a pilgrim's phrase. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So Jesus isn't the only, if you will, pilgrim to make his way to Jerusalem. It was what you did as a Jew. You would pilgrim to Jerusalem. And as you entered the city, people, particularly if you were a rabbi and you had followers, people would proclaim to you, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. What they've done, what they do here is they shout that out, is they add these keywords, king. Blessed is the king who comes in the name of the Lord. And they take this pilgrim's greeting and they give, serious overtones to kingship. And that's actually, as I think you're about to ask me, is what gets under the Pharisees' skin.
Well, it's quite prophetic. I'm not quite sure that you're necessarily the Messiah then, but...
I do speak to God, though. He speaks to me.
But... I suppose that was the thing, because whilst the disciples have recognised him as the king, not everyone has recognised him as the king. And particularly the Pharisees, well, it's in sentence 39 that some of the Pharisees tell Jesus to rebuke his disciples. Now, the Pharisees were like some of the religious leaders of the time. Mm-hmm. What made them so upset?
Sure. Well, what made them so upset was the fact that here's a group of people saying, you're the king. And the Pharisees, as Rob said, are a group of religious people, religious leaders. They actually control much of society, culture. If you're a Jew, your life is governed by the law. So your duty is to fulfill all 631 laws that are prescribed to you in the Old Testament. And the Pharisees were those at the top of the tree who not only fulfilled those laws, but also governed to make sure you were fulfilling those laws. So there's a lot of power, a lot of esteem, a lot of privilege that comes with being a Pharisee. So there's a human element in which, this guy is a usurper. This guy represents something that could pull out from under them what they've spent their whole lives working towards, this power, this prestige, this importance. But they're also guardians of truth. So this is, if you're a Pharisee, your prime role is to guard the truth of the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures. And so from their perspective, here's another potential heretic. Here's someone who's proclaiming or to be something, or others are lifting him up and saying he's the king, and they're just like, well, this is not on. We've got some heresy here going in. We need to come in and shut it down.
Yeah, so we need to quieten him down.
Yeah.
And so that when they're saying...
They were fairly effective with that in the end, weren't they?
Well, but why didn't they recognise who he was, though?
That's a good question. And the follow-up question is why don't so many of us recognise him?
Well, that's right.
But why didn't they recognise him? Well, why don't we recognise anything at times? If you have I do have young daughters, so I've discovered these books. The best kind of book for a child is a book that has like thousands of things in it. Then you can say, find the mouse. And it's going to take 10 minutes for them to find the mouse, and so you've got some peace and quiet, right?
You can have a little doze.
Exactly.
Shut your eyes. Yeah,
all right,
okay,
but if you tell someone, you give someone a picture and you say, find the mouse, and they've never seen a mouse before, how do you think they're going to go? I mean, it's okay for us to go, here's the Messiah. But if you say, these people have been looking for a Messiah for hundreds and hundreds of years. So suddenly for the anointed one, for the Messiah to appear, they'd cut down other heretics.
And probably in their minds, and probably rightly so.
Absolutely.
They were frauds.
Absolutely. So suddenly, here's the guy that turns up who's the real deal, but they don't know what they're looking for because they've never seen it before. And I think in that sense, it's partly really easy to overlook, especially if you throw in, the particular nature of what it was to be a Pharisee and what they're expecting. And we talked about it before. You're expecting a particular king. These guys are expecting someone who's going to cause a social revolution, overturn Roman rule. Israel exists. It's a state, if you will, but it's subject to Roman dominion. They're looking for someone who's a political leader who's going to turn things upside down. So to have someone come in who's the complete opposite of that, it's in one sense, it's amazing that anyone picked it up at all. Even his own disciples didn't pick it up for a very long time. Before he enters into Jerusalem, he spells it out. These are the guys that have been with Jesus for 3 years. They've wandered the dusty streets of Palestine. They've seen him perform miracles. And then he says, we're going to Jerusalem because the Son of Man needs to die. And they don't get it.
It's a miracle that anyone understood. But I suppose Jesus says that it's for those who have the ears to hear.
Yeah, that's right.
Let them hear.
Yeah.
And that those are the types of people that will respond.
Even within the Pharisees, there were people who heard. Nicodemus is a classic example of someone whose ears were open. There were many who came from, a lot of people who followed Jesus came from poor socioeconomic backgrounds, but there were many who came from those same backgrounds that didn't hear.
Yeah. The passage also suggests that these people, these Pharisees and so on, have sort of missed out. They've missed out on something big. I'm just wondering, have you ever missed out on anything big?
Nothing huge, because I did end up marrying the girl, so I didn't end up missing out. But when
She nearly missed out on you, though. Was that?
Thanks, Rob. You can invite me back. But, so I think thinking through that, something I missed out on. I don't know. It's funny when birthdays come around. I'm much better than I was, but when you're 17, 18, and, you have sort of a mercenary attitude to birthdays, right? You get a whole stack of cards, rip the card open, quick look, is there a 20, 50, 100? No, throw it. Next one, quick look. And nowhere is this more profound than I think at your 18th. Maybe, hopefully you've matured by 21. And I remember at my 18th, I had, hundreds of cards, and it takes a long time to read every card. So it was just rip the envelope open it, no, chuck, rip, chip, 20, that one's friend level 3, 100, like this person a lot. You go through it, and I remember chucking one out, had a quick look, chucked it out, and then my nana, who, nanas only ever give you, like in my case, literally hankies, and eventually Tats Lotto tickets. But there was a substantial amount of money in that card, and I just went, whoop, chuck. And then my nan went, oh, did you appreciate your gift? I'm like, yeah, not, of course, you don't say no to your nan, yes. And she's like, oh, well, it was a fair amount of money, but sister, and I was like, a fair amount of money. So I'm going through the rubbish, trying to find the card to go, I didn't miss out in the end, but I could have.
Right, okay.
But I wonder even if that analogy, so you're talking about, people who missed out in terms of seeing Jesus, right? And I think that's really important, but it's interesting, isn't it, Jesus' reaction to that? I mean,
Well, that's right. So he's weeping.
Yeah.
And he sort of says, if you only you'd known at the time of God's coming amongst you, then things might have been a bit different. It's as though these people have kind of, I'm here, I've made it as clear as I can, but you've missed out.
Yeah, well, and that's the interesting thing, because those who missed out didn't recognise that they'd missed out. It wasn't like they went through they heard out, oh, I've missed out, and that $100 went through the trash and retrieved it. You didn't understand that you were missing out. And I think a better analogy is to look at Jesus who weeps. And I have a 2-year-old who loves play school. And recently we got tickets to take her to a play school concert. And this has happened from time to time. You terrible twos, misbehaving. I won't, in case this ever goes live, I won't say what she was doing or the words that a 2-year-old can say. But as parents, you're trying to discipline. And part of us were thinking, well, do we not go to play school? Now, she didn't know she was going to play school. So, it wouldn't have affected her in her thinking that she was missing out on something. But as parents, that we would grieve that because, this is something we're really looking forward to. It's something we know she'd love. And now we're thinking about taking it away. And especially, it cost us $50. I mean, that hurt. I'd cry. I'd cry over that.
That's almost a nana's birthday present. Yeah.
So, so Jesus is weeping because he knows in such a profound way what they're missing out on. And that, Jesus is a man of deep compassion and love, but more than that, he of all people truly understands what they're missing out on, even though they are ignorant and don't understand.
Luke writes so that his readers can know the certainty of the events of Jesus' life. In this passage, he writes to assure his readers that Jesus is the humble King who comes in God's name. So please thank our guest today, James Hornby.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.